James Carter's fingers trembled as he stared at the unsigned bankruptcy form. A half-empty bottle of bourbon sat beside it, warm in the midday sun. His phone buzzed once. Angela. Then silence. She had blocked him. Hours earlier, she'd found out he had secretly drained the remainder of her college fund, money left by her late mother, to pay off mounting credit card debt. "I was just trying to keep us afloat," he had pleaded. But the betrayal was too deep. Now, alone in his one-bedroom apartment above a closed-down seafood restaurant, James whispered into the stillness, "I never meant to hurt her." Outside, the world moved on. Kids played across the street. A delivery truck rumbled by. But inside James, everything had stopped. He wasn't grieving a business anymore. He wasn't grieving a marriage. He was grieving the version of himself that believed he was still a good man. What do you do when you've lost everything? And you're the reason it happened. The truth was unbearable. But maybe even more unbearable was the question that haunted him now. Was it really all my fault? James hadn't always been the man lying to his daughter. A decade ago, he was the owner of Carter's Grill, a small but beloved family seafood restaurant on the Santa Cruz Pier. Locals loved the house chowder. Tourists came for the view. Every photo in his phone, before the pandemic, had laughter in it. His ex-wife, Marlene, helped with the books. Angela used to fold napkins at the counter, humming whatever pop song was trending that summer. He'd built something solid, something that felt like a legacy. Then came COVID. First the tourists vanished, then the regulars, then the staff. He tried takeout, delivery, DIY kits. Nothing stuck. When the pier shut down, Carter's Grill lasted 3 more weeks. He maxed out 2 credit cards, paying his cook and dishwasher before finally locking the door for good. He didn't tell Marlene. She had remarried across town and rarely picked up his calls anyway. He didn't tell Angela either. Just said business was tight. He sold the flat-screen TV, then the espresso machine. He stopped paying rent. When Angela asked why the fridge was empty, he said he forgot to shop. The lie grew roots, and shame grew thorns. By the time he told her the truth, that he was broke, the restaurant was gone, and her college fund had been touched, he had already lied so many times that the confession felt like another betrayal. Angela's reaction wasn't loud. That was the worst part. She didn't scream. She just went quiet. Her eyes, once soft with worry, turned distant. "That was Mom's money," she said. "She saved that for me." He tried to explain that he thought he could put it back, that he'd been applying for loans and had a plan. But every word felt like another excuse. Angela nodded slowly, walked to the door, and left. Later that night, she blocked his number. In the weeks that followed, James spiraled. He applied for over 30 jobs: kitchen prep, delivery driver, janitorial night shifts. Nothing stuck. His knee, long wrecked from years of standing on the line, throbbed constantly. He stopped shaving. He started drinking. But what really broke him wasn't the money. It was the story in his head. The story that he had failed as a husband, a father, and a man. That he should have seen the economic crash coming. That he should have sold earlier. That he shouldn't have paid employees out of pocket. That he shouldn't have lied. That everything falling apart, his business, his marriage, his child's trust, was his doing. And maybe, he thought, that meant he didn't deserve to come back from it. At night, he replayed scenes like punishment. Marlene walking out 5 years ago saying, "You always think hard work will fix everything." His landlord slipping the eviction notice under the door. The moment Angela's face changed from love to disappointment. He wrote apology letters he never sent, drafted job applications he never submitted. One morning, after a night of drinking, he walked to the pier and stood at the same spot where he used to hand out menus. The restaurant was boarded up, windows dusty. He pressed his palm against the glass. His reflection didn't look like someone worth saving. Inside his mind, the trial never stopped. Evidence piled up. Witnesses testified. And he was always the accused. But part of him, quiet, almost inaudible, started asking a different question. Is this really all my fault? Not as an excuse, not to escape accountability, but because the weight had become too heavy to carry. He remembered things he'd ignored, like how the bank changed lending terms mid-pandemic, collapsing a small business loan he'd counted on. How local politicians promised aid that never came. How staff members begged him to stay open just a few more weeks so they could pay rent. And he said yes, thinking, hoping, maybe. How he had been trying to protect people. Not perfectly, not always honestly, but not cruelly. Yet guilt doesn't care about nuance. It only counts the failures. And the world didn't help. Marlene texted once after finding out about the college fund. Unbelievable. You're still wrecking everything. A friend he'd leaned on for a loan stopped answering. The online forums he lurked in were filled with stories of men like him. Dads, workers, decent people, who fell and stayed fallen. The message was clear. You blew it, you're the problem. End of story. But what if that wasn't the full story? One night, lying on the floor, the bourbon bottle empty beside him, James stared at the ceiling and thought, maybe I didn't break everything. Maybe I just broke. That tiny shift, almost imperceptible, opened something. Not relief, not redemption, but a pause in the self-hate loop. For the first time in months, he let himself wonder, if I'm not the villain, who else am I allowed to be? James met Desmond Huyn on a Tuesday morning that began like most others, aimless, hungover, and gray. He had woken up on a park bench near the old boardwalk, his jacket damp from ocean mist, a stale cigarette still tucked behind his ear. Someone had called an ambulance, but James refused to be taken in. He insisted he was fine, just tired, just drunk, just lost. A volunteer at the shelter convinced him to accept a ride home from one of their drivers. That's how Desmond pulled up in a battered silver Toyota with a cracked windshield and prayer beads hanging from the rearview mirror. Desmond didn't speak much at first, just nodded politely, eyes warm but unreadable, like someone who's seen too much and decided long ago not to flinch. James slumped in the passenger seat, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the blur of the coastline outside. Halfway through the drive, Desmond broke the silence. "Rough night?" James grunted. "Define rough." Desmond nodded again, not pushing. Instead, he turned on the radio, an old jazz station, soft saxophone drifting between them like fog. When they reached the faded apartment complex, Desmond didn't drive off immediately. "You used to run Carter's Grill, didn't you?" he asked. James blinked. "Yeah, you know it?" "Used to eat there with my wife," Desmond said. "She liked the gumbo." There was no sentimentality in his tone, just memory. James stared at him for a second, then muttered, "It's gone." Desmond smiled faintly. "So's she." James waited for him to say more. Desmond didn't. Then, almost offhandedly, he added, "I was drunk when I drove her to the hospital. Didn't think I was too far gone. She died on the way. Stroke. We never said goodbye." There was no drama in his voice, just a quiet grief that had forgotten how to cry. A silence settled, heavier this time. James didn't ask what happened. Something in Desmond's face said the answer was too big for words. "You want some tea?" Desmond offered suddenly. "I keep a kettle in the back." James hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure. Why not?" They ended up sitting in folding chairs outside Desmond's small rented garage, converted halfway into a shrine, half-storage unit. A single Buddha statue sat on a low shelf, incense gently rising like breath. Desmond handed James a steaming paper cup and sat opposite him. "I'm not a monk," Desmond said. "Not a teacher, just a man who's been broken a few times." James sipped in silence. The tea was bitter, earthy, honest. Desmond spoke again. "I lost my shop during the last recession. Nail salon, worked 16 hours a day. Thought if I pushed hard enough, I could outrun fear." He chuckled. "Fear's faster than people think." James looked down. "You have kids?" "One son. Doesn't talk to me anymore. I tried to control too much. Gave him money, advice, guilt, everything but space." There was no self-pity in his voice, just the flat, worn-out cadence of a man who had stopped bargaining with the past. James finally asked, "So what? You found Buddhism and everything made sense?" Desmond laughed. "Hell no. I found Buddhism and got more confused. First thing it taught me was, your pain isn't unique, but your responsibility is." James stared at him. "That's comforting." "It's not supposed to be," Desmond replied. "It's supposed to be real." He paused, letting that settle. "We all want someone to tell us it's not our fault," he said. "And sometimes that's true. But sometimes we're just part of a storm made of many winds. Pandemic, debt, pride, silence, love, shame. One gust doesn't cause the collapse. But we still have to walk through the wreckage." James didn't respond. He didn't know how. Desmond leaned forward slightly. "You're not the villain. You're not the victim. You're just a man who got caught in the middle of a very human mess." There was no sermon in his tone, no performance, just presence. They sat a while longer, the breeze cutting through, seagulls crying in the distance. Desmond lit a stick of incense, then handed James a small card, an invitation to a local men's meditation group. "You don't have to believe in anything," he said. "Just sit. Let your breath be more than your thoughts." James turned the card over in his hand. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. But 3 days later, he showed up. It wasn't what he expected. No chanting. No saffron robes. Just 7 men sitting in a circle in a dusty rec room behind a bookstore. A plumber, a retired soldier, a recovering alcoholic, a high school counselor. None of them pretended to be wise. They spoke about failure like it was furniture. Heavy, always in the room, sometimes rearranged but never fully gone. One man shared that he'd cheated on his wife during lockdown because he felt invisible. Another man, Mark, a construction worker with inked knuckles, said he used to hit things, walls, doors, once his son's backpack. "I never touched my kid," he said, "but I scared him. That's almost worse." The room went still. No one nodded. They just let him finish. They didn't ask for solutions. They just listened, breathed, and nodded. When it was James's turn, he hesitated. Then he said quietly, "I lied to my daughter. I took money that wasn't mine. I thought I was doing it to protect her. But maybe I was just protecting myself." No one scolded him. No one forgave him either. But one man across the circle, an older guy with paint-stained hands, looked him straight in the eyes and said, "You're still here. That means something." After the meeting, Desmond caught up with him outside. He didn't say much, just handed James a tiny folded slip of paper. Later that night, James opened it. It read, "You don't have to be better than the worst thing you've done. You just have to be honest about it and keep going." It wasn't salvation, but it was enough to make James show up again the next week, and the week after. He wasn't healed, but for the first time, he wasn't alone in the wreckage. James didn't become a new man overnight. There was no light bulb moment, no magical forgiveness text from Angela, no sudden clarity. What did happen, Slowly, and almost imperceptibly, was a quiet loosening of the noose he'd tied around his own neck. He kept showing up to the meditation group, even on the days when shame made him want to disappear. He sat on the same folded blanket every Wednesday, eyes closed, back aching, thoughts noisy. At first, it felt pointless. Nothing happened. The breath came and went. The past still burned. But Desmond had told him something early on that stuck. The breath doesn't solve your problems. It just gives you somewhere to return when everything else is loud. So James returned. Not because he believed in it, but because there was nothing else left to try. One evening, after the group, Desmond invited him to stay back. They sat on folding chairs while the others left in pairs. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and sandalwood. "You ever hear of the second noble truth?" Desmond asked. James shook his head. "I'm not great with religious stuff." Desmond smiled. "It's not religion. It's just observation. The second noble truth says that suffering has causes. That might sound obvious, but most people stop there. What it actually means is, if you want to stop suffering, you have to look at the cause, but not just one cause, the whole web." James furrowed his brow. Like the story you've been telling yourself, that you're the one who broke everything. That if you had just worked harder, lied less, planned better, none of this would have happened. "Well, yeah," James muttered. "Isn't that true?" Desmond didn't argue. He just leaned back, eyes soft. "Maybe some of it is. But do you really think the entire pandemic, the restaurant industry collapse, your wife's discontent, your daughter's heartbreak, all of that came down to your bad decisions alone?" James looked down. "Feels that way." "Of course it does," Desmond said. "Because blame is simpler than complexity. If you're the only one at fault, then the world makes sense. But it's not true, and living in that lie is killing you." It was the first time James had heard it put that way. Not to excuse him, but to free him from a prison of oversimplification. He wasn't innocent, but he wasn't singularly responsible either. He was a thread in a larger, messy, painful knot. That night, James couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the idea that pain has many parents, and that self-blame, while seductive, was also a form of control. As long as everything was his fault, he could pretend he had power. But what if he accepted he didn't? The following week, James spoke to the group again. He didn't apologize. He didn't confess. He just shared. "I always thought guilt was proof that I cared. That if I stopped blaming myself, I'd become one of those guys who just shrugs and says, 'Shit happens.' But lately, I'm realizing maybe guilt was just me trying to stay in charge. Like if I punish myself enough, things will balance out." One of the men nodded. Another quietly said, "Yeah, that's the trap." James didn't cry, but something inside him softened, like a grip loosening. Over time, he began making small changes. He stopped drinking. Not all at once, and not perfectly, but enough to feel the difference in his mornings. He began walking each day, 5 blocks, then 10. He started keeping a notebook, writing down what he noticed. Pigeons fighting over bagels, dogs pulling against their leashes, the sound of rain on the dumpster lid outside his window. He never once wrote, "I am healing," but the pages said it for him. He also wrote a letter to Angela, not to fix things, just to tell her the truth. He wrote, "I understand if you never speak to me again. I touched what didn't belong to me, and I lied to your face. That's mine to carry. But I want you to know, I'm learning. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that your silence made me listen harder than words ever could." He didn't send it right away. He read it aloud to the group first. One of the men suggested cutting the sentence, "I'm a terrible father," not because it wasn't true, but because it wasn't helpful. "You're not your worst day," the man said. and your daughter deserves to know the rest of you." Eventually, James mailed the letter. No reply came. Weeks passed. Still, he kept living. Not waiting for a response, but not giving up on it either. One afternoon, he found himself outside the local community center, staring at a flyer taped to the door. Free cooking class. Thursdays at 6 p.m. Volunteers needed. He went in, spoke to the coordinator, said he used to run a restaurant, that he wasn't looking for money, just a way to give back. The next Thursday, James stood behind a folding table, teaching 4 teenagers how to make gumbo. He showed them how to chop celery without bruising it, how to stir the roux slowly, how to taste before salting. One of the kids said, "Dude, you should have your own show." James laughed. "I used to have a restaurant," he said. "Now I have Thursdays." For a moment, James wanted to say more, that he missed being someone important, that sometimes he still dreamed of stainless steel counters and the smell of frying oil. But he didn't say it. He just stirred the gumbo and let the steam rise, like prayer. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't glory, but it was breath, it was presence. And that, Desmond had taught him, was where freedom begins. You don't erase your past. You stop using it as a weapon against yourself. You don't fix the story. You outgrow the version where you were only the villain. And that's how James began, quietly and honestly, to be someone else. Not someone perfect, just someone still walking, still learning, still here. James never got a grand moment of closure, no tearful reunion, no apology from the world. But one Sunday morning, as he stirred a pot of gumbo in the community center kitchen, his phone buzzed. A text, just one line. From Angela. "Thanks for the letter. I'm not ready yet, but I heard you." What she didn't write, but what James could almost feel between the words, was this. "I wanted to hate you. I really did. You lied. You stole. You broke everything I trusted. But when I read your letter, it didn't feel like manipulation. It felt like the father I remember, the one who taught me how to taste gumbo, who used to sing Sinatra while cleaning shrimp. I'm not ready to come back, but I'm not trying to erase you either." He stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't reply right away. He just let the message settle into his chest like warmth he hadn't felt in months. She didn't forgive him, but she hadn't erased him either. That was enough for now. Later that night, sitting on his balcony with a cup of tea and the city humming around him, James realized something. He still carried the past, the failures, the shame, the weight of what he couldn't undo. But it no longer defined him. It was just one part of the story, not the whole thing. Healing hadn't been a breakthrough. It had been a series of small, stubborn choices, showing up, telling the truth, forgiving himself slowly, and it began the moment he asked, not to be exonerated, but to be human again. If you're watching this and you're stuck in a story where you're the one to blame for everything, pause. Breathe. Your pain may have many causes. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you honest. And maybe that's the beginning of freedom. Not pretending you're innocent, but realizing you don't have to be in order to be loved, to grow, to begin again. If this story touched something in you, share it. Someone else might be trapped in the same loop you just stepped out of. And if you're ready, the next video in this series is waiting. We talk about what to do when you're tired of trying. Because healing isn't just about fixing. It's about resting too, and you deserve that.